Hello, this is Dr. Rebecca Wood, and I would like to welcome you to the Week 6 lecture. This week we are going to discuss beginnings, endings, and research. We all want sparkling introductions, and these are some suggestions for making your introduction as sparkling as possible. Of course, you want to sparkle up your introduction after you've written the main paper and the conclusion, and then you go back and make the introduction everything it could be within the time period you have allotted. So your introduction is where you begin your story. It's where you explain the point of the paper, the thesis statement, explain any foundational information that the audience needs to understand the paper, foreshadow the main points if you choose to do so that will be discussed in the paper, and get and keep the reader's attention, possibly with an amazing statistic or fact, which needs to be documented, a rhetorical question, an intriguing quotation from one of the sources documented carefully, or you may want to draw the reader in with a brief personal story, but just don't make that story too personal. Here's a couple of famous literary introductions. Moby Dick, the classic novel, begins with the line, "Call me Ishmael." And so that's a line that, people even put that in jokes now, and it's a line that begins that story, and the entire story is told from the point of view of the main character and the narrator, Ishmael, as the crew of his ship go after that white whale, and you have to wonder, is that a whale or is there something more in the story besides just a whale? And then there is the famous beginning to A Tale of Two Cities by Charles Dickens. It was the best of times, it was the worst of times, and that introduction actually goes on a little further than that. If you're interested, when you have time, you could look that book up and see what you think. And here's an introduction to a story, and this introduction I thought was very good because it involves our United States military, it involves food, it had an illustration, and it had a quote here, unfortunately, that was not documented, so those always stick out for me. And then it tells us why the Army food scientists decided to develop a pizza that could be held for up to 3 years and still eaten safely by our troops in the field. And you'll notice that I documented this material from the sources with the name of the author, the last name of the author, and a comma, and a year of publication. So that's APA documentation. And then here's another introduction that I found to an article that was on the Chicago Tribune, and my apologies to all the Cardinals fans here in St. Louis. This article was written this weekend, and so it's an interesting article. I don't know if you'll want to read it since it's about the Cubs. I do have friends who are Cubs fans, so I kind of can understand their viewpoint. And so this is an article that began with diehard Cubs fans and how they've suffered through 108 years before they got another World Series win. And then it also brings in the White Sox fans, since this was written in the Chicago Tribune for the entire city of Chicago. And so this story is a way to maybe bring in some Chicago residents, but if someone else from St. Louis or elsewhere comes across this article, it's very clear what it's about, and it's a little bit humorous, so we might still want to read it. Also, we want satisfying conclusions. We might want to repeat the main points of our paper, but not in the same exact words of the source. Often a conclusion brings a paper full circle. We may be back where we started, but we've learned from our journey together, and our audience may have even changed their way of thinking. We can review the main points that were discussed in the paper, again, not in the same exact words, and make sure that everything that is mentioned in the introduction and conclusion is actually discussed in the paper. And the conclusion allows us to say goodbye to the reader memorably, possibly with another amazing statistic or fact, documented, of course. We could answer the rhetorical question we asked in the introduction. What do you know about global warming? Well, after this paper, you know a lot more. An intriguing quotation from one of the sources, documented carefully. Or we can conclude the personal story begun in the introduction. Perhaps the story was about the time our cat got stuck in the tree. Well, in the conclusion, we can talk about how we got that cat down from the tree. Literary conclusions. At the end of Moby Dick, when Moby Dick has actually sunk that whaling ship that was trying to kill him, we have the entire ship and all of the crew except for Ishmael has sunk to the bottom of the sea, and here is the ending sentence of the book. Now small fowls flew screaming over the yet yawning gulf. A sullen white surf beat against its steep sides. Then all collapsed, and the great shroud of the sea rolled on as it rolled 5,000 years ago. So all this adventure has happened, and whales have died, and people have died, and suddenly the sea is just rolling on as it did 5,000 years ago, or maybe 5 million years ago. And you'll notice that I documented this piece from the name of the author of the piece, not the editor of the book or any other person. So that is documented from Melville, who is the author of the book, and this is the first year it was published. And then also I have the ending of A Tale of Two Cities, where the hero of the book is going to his execution, but he's doing it for altruistic reasons, and he says, "It is a far, far better thing that I do than I have ever done. It is a far, far better rest that I go to than I have ever known." And so this is a quote that ends A Tale of Two Cities. Here are some research tips and tricks. You want to do your research early in the process. You may also need to do more research in the middle of the project, so you're never totally done until you're totally done. You can use the sleuth search tools. Sources found at the library are vetted by librarians and editors and are very likely to be good sources or unlikely to be bogus, whichever way you want to look at it. If you use sources found on the web, please double check them for signs that they could be bogus. Are they trying to sell you something? Generally, sources that are a .gov, .org, or .edu site are considered legitimate. Also, major news sites, because they're responsible for everything that they publish, can also be safely used even though their websites end in .com. Does a single source seem to disagree with all of your other sources? If so, that source may not be valid and you may not want to use it. Does an article have at least an article title or an author name? If you have a website that doesn't have any of the elements necessary for the references page, you probably should not use it. Here are some more research tips and tricks. Skim through your material the first time. Eliminate any sources that are too hard to read, too boring, or not relevant. I realize that you can't always do all your sources exactly the way you want, but if it's really impossible to read, don't try to use it. Use at least one thing from your source, if it's a good source. Even if that piece of material is short, just document it. Don't waste the sources. Document all your material from sources. Anything taken word for word must be enclosed in quote marks and accompanied by an APA in-text citation. Not documenting causes plagiarism. And any summarized or paraphrased material must be accompanied by an APA in-text citation. All material found in your research, even if it is not borrowed in the same exact words, needs to be documented. We always want to document, document, document. And then if we're wondering about ways to expand your paper 2 into your final paper, there are 2 ways to do that. You can add more material throughout your current paper 2, adding something here and there all the way throughout. Also, please make sure you do a save as before you start your final paper so that your final paper is a new file so that you don't lose your original paper 2. Going on, break off the conclusion of your paper and add a new subtopic to your paper. So you could just basically unplug your conclusion, add a new subtopic like we did here. Instead of our paper about global warming being factory air pollution, automobile exhaust, and chemicals that damage the ozone layer, we could also add deforestation down there near the bottom. When we're finished expanding the body of the paper, put the conclusion back in place. As you added the material and after you've added it, edit it as necessary so that it fits into the paper. And does your new material need to be mentioned in the introduction and conclusion? And if so, please do it. Also, this is our references page, and so please let me know if you notice any mistakes in the documentation in this presentation. I would appreciate knowing that. And this is the references page, and we have This book, Dickens, Charles, or C for Charles, 1859 was the year of publication. Here is our title of the book, and it was available from Amazon.com because I purchased that book and it's on my Kindle account. So please take a look at this presentation on a PowerPoint if you would like to, so that you can view it at your own pace, and ask me if you have any questions. And I hope you have a great week. Thank you. Bye-bye.